Welcome to Headroom, where we discuss all things essential to mental health and well-being. I'm your host, Jim Owens, a licensed professional counselor at Lansing Community College. Before we begin, I'd like to emphasize that this podcast does not constitute psychotherapy. It does, however, introduce you to some phenomenal people who have incredible ideas for you and your life. Having said that, let's get into the Headroom and begin today's conversation with Louise Rabidoux. Welcome, Louise.
Thank you for having me on your podcast.
Well, I'm really excited that you're here. I appreciate you agreeing to do this. So I have kind of three parts to this podcast. The first is going to be for us to get a chance to know you a little bit. And then next, I'd like to ask you a little bit about what life was like for you when you were in college. And then finally, I'd like to ask, for some ideas you have that can just help people in general with their mental health and well-being. That sound good?
Sure.
Okay. So let's get to know you a little bit. What does a good day look like to you? Or a great day?
A great day?
Yeah.
Well, it would definitely start with coffee. I'll tell you that. I do like to ease into the morning and not rush, but generally a great day would involve at least some time outside in nature, time with people that I care about, hopefully making the world a little bit better place in some way or another, and, just kind of appreciating life, where I'm at in life.
Mm-hmm. A big part of that, I know you love the outdoors and being outdoors.
Yes.
Camping, biking,
Yep.
various other things. And I'm sure that may fit into some of your personal wellness strategies and how you take care of yourself. So what are some other things you're passionate or excited about? If you wanted people to know you a little bit more, what would you say?
Well, I'm a counselor here at LCC, and I'm passionate about my work. So that's definitely something that drives me and motivates me. Outside of work, passionate about the outdoors, as you mentioned, hiking, mountain biking, camping, gardening, dining al fresco, sitting on the deck or in the hammock reading. So anything outdoors I love and rejuvenates me as part of my self-care routine. Just passionate about being outside.
Thank you for reminding everybody your position at the college. I should have done that, but you are one of our counselors, just like me at LCC. And so I appreciate you. And I know you have a big passion about that. So let's talk about that a little bit. How did you become a counselor? What was your path toward, in school? And I'll ask some questions about what life was like in college, but how did you decide to even go to college? Was that just a foregone conclusion in your family, or?
Somewhat. Both of my parents had degrees. My mother had a bachelor's and a master's. She was a speech pathologist. And my dad, originally, he went into the Army and then went to college at LCC first and then MSU on the GI Bill.
Wow. And
he was a social worker. So both of my parents were in the helping professions. And so there was kind of an assumption that I would go to college. My older sister went to college. So I think I always assumed I would go to college. And I was always interested in the helping professions. But I really had no idea where I was going to school. And I was a really good student in high school. Got good grades, honor society, but I think was not emotionally ready to think about college. And so I really dragged my feet as far as college visitations. I just wasn't ready to even think about it. And I ended up going to Western because I got a substantial academic scholarship.
Hey.
And so it was like,
That works.
I guess I'm going to Western. They're paying me to come here. So Western Michigan University, it's a great university, and I had a great experience there, but I definitely kind of felt that I ended up there as opposed to, chose it specifically.
Yeah.
And I think probably a lot of LCC students can relate to that, that they kind of might feel like they end up at LCC either because they don't have a clear career path or maybe didn't get accepted to one of their other colleges. But it was a great experience in the end, but it definitely was not... it was different than, say, my sister who went to U of M, who really wanted to go to
That was
U
her
of M.
dream.
Yeah.
So you had this vision, I'm going to go to college, and it ended up choosing you a little bit more than you chose it. And you were accepting of that. Hey, I'll go.
Yeah.
And we'll see what happens.
Yeah.
And you knew helping professions. So what about counseling? How did you decide on a major in college?
Well, I think my first and second year of college, I took a career planning class that was taught by the WMU counselors, actually. And I was also looking at teaching and social work. And I realized that the part of the helping professions that I was most passionate about was that one-on-one. So as opposed to a teacher in a classroom trying to help and change the world with a group of people, I was really more invested in that one-on-one relationship. And Western had a great social work program. And I was very involved in a lot of advocacy and change groups and trying to make the world a better place through
political
systemic.
action groups.
Yes, I did spend a lot of time in undergraduate protesting a variety of things.
Well, that's good. College students should do that stuff, and everyone should, at some point. Yeah.
Yeah. So I eventually I worked at a variety of jobs, and most of them were the one-on-one counseling kinds of jobs I was most passionate about. And so after undergrad, I worked for a while, and then when I was applying to graduate schools, it was really very much counseling that I wanted to focus on, and do therapy and provide that mental health support.
Yeah, I think that's interesting in the sense that your undergrad was social work. You might have thought you would have gone on for a master's in social work at the time, but back then they weren't as clinically focused probably as they are now, because there are licensed clinical social workers who do therapy in our city and all over. But yeah, certainly counseling was the one-on-one experience you were looking for.
Definitely.
And it's sort of in your parents' footsteps of your mom as a speech pathologist. They probably work one-on-one with people. And as your dad is a social worker, what kind of work did he do as a social worker?
Well, his degree, he was a social worker in the 70s and 80s and 90s. And so he worked for the state of Michigan for many years in more of that traditional social work, what we often think of as social work with people who are in poverty or in the foster care system. And then he ended up for many years working with the prison population at Jackson Prison.
Oh, wow. Well, a little bit more about your college life. I like to ask this question. What was something that almost stopped you from graduating from college, but obviously it didn't? So give us a little drama.
A little drama. Well, I will admit my freshman year was not a great year. Academically, I was fine. I was in the honors college. I think I was academically prepared for college. I got decent grades, but emotionally, I was not ready to be in college. I struggled, making friends. I was in a long distance relationship with my high school boyfriend who was in another state. And I really I was very focused on home and family, and I just wasn't ready to kind of spread my wings and figure out what college was all about. And I was not a very happy person. So I considered leaving Western. I considered transferring. In the end, I did meet some people that became good friends, and I stuck it out. But what really derailed me was myself. I was just kind of not in the headspace or the headroom to really invest in the college experience the way that I would have liked to. So I did go back my sophomore year, and I met a lot more people and got connected. Incidentally, a lot of those people are friends still today. Wow. Was very involved in my church at Western, and many of those are my friends now. When I decided to go into social work, met some great people, including one of my best friends now. And so that really, I think, changed the trajectory of how I felt about my undergraduate experience, how I felt about Western Michigan University, how I felt about Kalamazoo. But the first year was rocky. And I see that in a lot of my students. People think that college is the time of your life and easy peasy and everyone's partying and has a great time, but it's rough, especially that first year.
Yeah. No, I think it's interesting when you left for summer break, I'm assuming you came home, kind of a traditional, went away to college for 2 semesters, came home. And then in the summer, did you kind of have to work yourself up to, because there was no promise that life was going to be better to go back for a sophomore year. I mean, you found some courage or some hope somewhere. I don't know if you can, it's not that far back.
Yeah.
How did you do that? You know, what were you thinking that kind of, I got to go back for my sophomore year? You know?
Well, I think part of it was I met a good friend and that I really connected with. And then so she and I decided to be roommates. So that was a good connection. And so it was an investment in that. Yeah. And I didn't have another option that seemed like a better opportunity. Like I could have lived in the area. I could have gone to MSU or come here to LCC, but there was nothing else that was pulling me strongly away from Western. And so I stuck it out, and definitely my sophomore year was much more enjoyable and fulfilling. And then I made a lot of really close connections. Yeah. And really, when you think about it, it is, at least for me, but a lot of it comes down to those connections, those personal connections, both as friends, as roommates, but the connections within your academic program. So it started to feel more like a home.
Yeah. Yeah, I remember we had a researcher from Harvard come and talk to us once here at the school a few years back, maybe 10 years ago now, about how important the support system is for academic success. And relationships with peers and relationships, frankly, with faculty and like what we have here, coaches and advisors. And he pointed to some data that said it's really not how academically prepared you are in college that will predict if you're going to be successful in college, oddly enough. Yeah. You would think, oh, the 4.0 students are going to just sail through college. And that's kind of what you're describing here is, that was me. And I did not sail.
No, it wasn't sailing. It was rough. I was really tethered to the shore.
Yeah. And that relationship you had with a peer, and then I think in your community, and then maybe, I don't know if you had maybe a good example in adults on campus, if you'll call it that, because you would have been sort of a kid. I guess not. You were an adult, 18, 19-year-old. But were there any adults, or did you have a mentor on campus or anything that was like a link for you or an anchor?
Well, I did have a couple instructors that were near and dear to my heart. And one of them was a social work instructor, Don Cooney. And he was just so passionate. And he also was very politically connected and involved with the protest movement and ideological. And that he was just an aspirational person and made me excited to be a social worker, excited to be involved and change the world and believe that you could do it.
So he was an inspiration. Did you end up, taking several classes from him?
I think I had 3 classes from him.
Would he have known you? Could he have picked you out from a crowd among his students?
At that time, yeah.
Yeah. I think that's important. And just to highlight that researcher really said it's important to get somebody on campus who knows you and checks in on you, and you feel like you have someone you can, as a confidant or a mentor, and probably his enthusiasm was infectious. And I agree from my own experience working at the school here. It's often not that I hear from students, and maybe it's just because the population we help, but it's often not that they say college is too hard. It's too academically demanding. That's generally not what I hear as the biggest barrier. Sometimes. Yeah. And it's usually math. Sorry.
Yes.
You agree?
Accounting.
Yeah. It's accounting and math. Yeah. It's usually those. And it's, some people, they don't have quite the skill set they'd like to have in those areas, but it's very often like the relationship stuff, the family stuff. And I'm using stuff, I really mean it's serious stuff.
Yeah.
It's the family relationship, feeling alone, isolated. And it's true when you walk around on campus, it's easy to just kind of get a view of everybody's walking around with a smile on their face, with a backpack slung over their shoulder, with purpose written into them. And it's not really the case. Exactly. People are, I think, struggling a bit more than we think.
And I think at a community college, it's even more so because we don't have on-campus dormitories. We don't have community housing. And so I think that really the pandemic of isolation, especially in traditional college-age students, it's profound. And being a commuter campus just exacerbates that.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. Well, let's see, what can we offer to alleviate that a little bit? We have a student life on campus with a lot of clubs, game clubs, and the psychology club, and all kinds of ways for you to be involved in sports and clubs and student organizations. And I was a part of those when I was in college. In fact, I joined the architecture club when I went to college. I went to school originally to be an architect. And it was really, it was fortuitous that I did that, because that club, I met people. And so I had a little bit of a social network. But we also went to architectural firms every other Friday and met with architects, and they'd buy pizza and pop. It was called Pizza and Pop with an Architect. And they'd sit with us for an hour and a half and show us what their job was like and show us blueprints and talk to us about their work. And I only went to about 2 or 3 of those, and I realized, oh, I do not want to be an architect. I don't think that's exactly what I want to do. Let me start looking at other options. And it just kind of opened my mind to the idea of, I think maybe there could be other options. So anyway, yeah, get involved in student life on campus to the extent you can. Okay, so let's get into some ideas here about what can make life better. I mean, I call this podcast Headroom in part to call attention to the fact that it seems like too few of us have sufficient room in our heads to comfortably handle one more stressor or one more crisis or one more problem. We don't have a lot of headroom. So what's an idea or a skill that you've come across that you think could improve our psychological space, where we can have a little more flexibility and regulate and handle things?
Well, I think when it boils down to it, I like to think of the concept of curiosity versus judgment. We all have so many thoughts in our head, and we judge our thoughts, we judge ourselves, we judge others, our news, our social media. There's so much judgment and labeling, and we often take those thoughts or opinions as truth or fact. And if we could shift or entertain the idea of curiosity, approaching things with curiosity, like, isn't that interesting that I did such and such, or that I had that thought? Isn't that interesting? And just observe it and be curious about that, or curious about someone else's motivation or someone else's situation or predicament. Instead of being judgmental about it, I think that gives ourselves a lot of grace, a lot of space to make mistakes and to not know. And just to be more of an observer with curiosity, as opposed to thinking we have to have an answer. That gives us, some space to just breathe.
Yeah, I've come across this idea myself, and I think, like you're describing, you can use it, as we say, intrapsychically for oneself. I can kind of observe, oh, I'm feeling nervous in this moment. Isn't that curious? I wonder what that's all about. Let me feel what that feels like. Or, oh, that person's supporting that political candidate. I wonder why they would do that with a really, I say genuine curiosity, right? Really go ahead.
No, exactly. Like, I know I ask a lot of questions, and even that's something in my family. Like, I wonder about a lot of things, and having that sense of curiosity helps us be interested in other people and ourselves, but allows other people to show us more of their motivations and who they are, as opposed to, thinking about, oh, well, I would never do that, or I can't understand that. It gives us an opening into understanding ourselves and other people.
Yeah, that's really, so that's kind of, why would we choose to be curious? Why? Making judgments is good, isn't it? Because then I know who to avoid, and I don't want to have certain experiences, right? So what's wrong with judgment? But we're quick to judge, and the judgment brings a kind of tone with it, which is, it isn't really flexible to or really overlay on the real world very well, right?
Yeah.
When in fact, curiosity invites an opportunity to grow and learn.
Yeah. And sometimes, our thoughts lie to us, especially if we struggle with mental health issues, with depression, anxiety. Our thoughts are not, absolute truths. And so if we can even think about our own thoughts with curiosity, like, well, isn't that an interesting thought?
Yeah, I think that's important. So probably you could read more. People who are listening, you could look up this idea of being curious about oneself. And it's a mantra we have in counseling, for sure, when we're training counselors to be curious, because sometimes, when you get an education, you're taught this is how people are. And even as we're brought up in our families, we're taught this is how people are. And those are always open to revision, I think. So what about mental health? What else about mental health? What else are some things that you think are essential to mental health? If somebody has good mental health, it's because they have what?
Well, I think connection is so important. Like we were talking about connection as a college student, whether that's in my story or in our students' lives. But, more and more, I think the pandemic showed us that the absence of connection or in-person connection was so detrimental to our overall mental health well-being. So much comes down to that connection, connecting with other humans, connecting with loved ones, connecting with a sense of purpose, connecting with a passion, a hobby, an intellectual pursuit. That connection, I think that I often realize I'm distilling things down to connection. And so when we are feeling disconnected from loved ones or support, or even disconnected from our own authentic needs and wants and desires, that's when we get into more trouble and get into areas of unhealth or distress. And so that's a question I ask myself, like if I'm not feeling okay or as good as I want to feel, like where am I missing connections? What connections can I bolster to do better? And I think that as the pandemic showed us, isolation is a serious issue, and we need to really foster connections where we can.
So can I push you for a few practical things? Because I hear this a lot from students too, and there is, I think, that sense where they share, like, I feel very alone. I feel like I have no one to talk to. And yet I'm also afraid to get out and try to make connections. So what do you say to people who are like, I agree with you, Louise. I probably do need more people in my life. Where do I get them?
Well, for some people, it's much easier than others. If you're an extrovert, if you're social, if you live in an environment that you're around people, that kind of lends itself to those connections. But if you're shy or an introvert or, live in a rural area, that can be really hard. And so you can start small. A connection can be with a pet. It can be with a parent. It can be with a family member. It can be with a colleague. People don't become friends or close connections overnight. It takes time. And it can often feel like we don't have the stamina or the energy to wait it out or to endure that time. But it's a rare find to have someone that you immediately connect with. And so often it's kind of like dating. You have to keep putting yourself out there. You have to go to clubs. You might go to one club and really connect with people, and that's your people. But often you might have to go to that same club multiple times over and over and over. You might have to reach out to them through texting or social media in between meetings. You might have to try a variety of clubs, both social clubs, professional clubs, spiritual organizations. And there's an element of luck and to it, but you have to kind of put the effort into, relationships take work. And so to have meaningful connections, I think it really is about investing and showing up.
Yeah, I totally agree with all that. And one of the practical things I've sort of come across with some of my students is they feel like they're in a class and they don't know anybody in the class, because not their whole friendship came with them. All their friends came to them with them to LCC, to their classes. I always say, like, you can move your seat in your classroom. If after a couple of sessions of your English class or your psych class, you notice that those people over there, I kind of like them and they kind of like the things and they're talking about the same kinds of things I like. And, they have a patch on their jacket that looks like a band I like or whatever. Go sit by them.
Yeah.
You can move your chair, get in proximity to people who are like you and who may like you and so on, right?
Yeah. But that takes risk. And I think that a lot of us are risk averse. Yeah. It's scary to take a risk, even a risk as simple as moving your chair in a classroom. Because, if you sit in one place the first day, that's your spot. And so we have to be vulnerable and willing to take a risk, to, suggest a study group, or, hey, let's get some coffee, or ask somebody, some low stakes question and see if they respond.
Yeah.
Those are all risky,
Yeah.
but often we can think of what's the worst that can happen.
Yeah.
It feels like rejection if someone doesn't respond, but a lot of people are also waiting for someone else to make that first move.
I agree. You and I both know there's other people in the classroom who wish someone would come sit by them and make a friend because they're feeling the same way. So.
Yes.
Well, that's really useful. I appreciate you sharing that. And I appreciate you coming on the podcast and talking with us, letting us know a little bit about who you are, where you came from, and what you value, and what your college experience was like. Because I think students can relate to that and appreciate that. And also these ideas of curiosity and go for look for where the connections are missing in your life and make some small effort in that direction.
Yeah.
So I really appreciate you coming on, and I thank you.
Well, thank you for having me on your podcast.
If anyone's interested in one-on-one help with their mental health or well-being, we have a counseling center on campus that currently enrolled students have access to. You can find out more at lcc.edu/counseling. And thanks for listening, and we'll see you next time in the Headroom.